Yeah, being stuck at home is a blessing. Sort of. Personally, I don't have that much new stuff left to edit, so that's why I'm digging my hard drives to post content on Instagram. As for the business part, with all this mess, I'm still trying to figure out a way to survive, but we'll discuss this in a future video. As I was reorganizing my drives and making some space, cleaning up, I stumbled upon my old images, of course, my old edit sessions back in the days when I was trying to find my style and experimenting some stuff. And I have to admit, I was a bit shocked, but I'm glad I did it because it taught me so much about the way I edited my images back then, the evolution of my workflow, and it even gave me new ideas for future shoots to come. So let's travel back in time together on this photo shoot that happened in Paris in 2014. I'm going to break down the edits of 2 images and see what we can learn 6 years later. And of course, I will edit these 2 images again today. Stéphane Deisel. I cannot remember all the details about this particular session, but what I can remember is that this was a TFP session, a collaboration. Not my first, but my second year trying to find dancers to photograph. And to be honest, these first 2 years, I struggled finding dancers willing to work with me. The weather was okay, partially cloudy, so the light was changing constantly. It was my wide angle phase that time when I always wanted to shoot with my 16 to 35 millimeter lens. So these are the 2 images we're going to talk about. These are straight out of camera. I re-edited and retouched again these images earlier this week, and I tried my best not to look at the edits that I did 6 years ago. But I will show you the results a little bit later. Right now, we are going to analyze the edits that I did back then. So let's stay positive and let's try not to be too harsh on these old edits. I started with a copy of the original file and converted it into a smart filter. This gives me more flexibility to go back if I want to and make further changes. This works with Camera Raw filter, for example. If I double click here, I can see what I did 6 years ago in Camera Raw. So what did I do? A few minor changes in the hue and saturation panel. But what strikes me here is the highlight sliders all the way down and shadow sliders all the way up. Plus it seems like I wanted to start with a warmer image. Here is the before, and here is the after. Usually I like to correct the brightness and the contrast of the image with the curves adjustment layer, or simply a brightness and contrast adjustment layer. Obviously here I boosted the contrast. Then I used a vibrance adjustment layer to desaturate the entire image, probably due to the heavy contrast applied earlier that totally changed the skin tones. Then, this is the mystery part of this color grading breakdown. I played with the hue and saturation of the image with 2 hue and saturation adjustment layers, one aimed at the highlights using the blending options mode and one for the shadows. But to be honest, I don't see much of a difference before and after. I then used a solid color adjustment layer. This is subtle too, but you can see that it is also aimed at the shadows using the same blending options technique. Here is the before and here is the after. I still do this these days, but not with a solid color adjustment. I like to warm up the shadows or at least add a specific color to the shadows. And the next step looks like a really heavy vignette. This is really easy to do. You take the marquee tool and create your desired shape, and then you add a curves adjustment layer, choose the amount of vignettes, invert the selection, Command I or Control I on a PC, and then blur the edges with a Gaussian blur. And then, surprisingly, I finished this image with a curves adjustment layer that completely erases all the work I did so far by cooling down the temperature of the entire image. That is a weird decision. Now let's see the edits that I did earlier this week. I started by boosting the exposure slightly in Lightroom before opening the file in Photoshop, and then I erased some distracting elements on the wall and in the background. The few minor changes I usually do in the beginning and that I did in Camera Raw on the old edits, I did it here with a color balance adjustment layer and a selective color adjustment layer. With color balance, you target the highs, mids, and lows, and with the selective color, you can target specific colors. For example, if you want to change the skin color, you can play with the reds and yellows. Then I changed the luminosity, highlight, and contrast of the image. I don't need to explain the brightness and contrast adjustment layer. It's an easy one. You can use curves and be a little bit more precise by targeting specific parts of the image. And then a little trick here, pretty much like the selective color adjustment layer we talked about earlier. You can target the luminosity of specific colors with a black and white adjustment layer. To do that, you have to change the blending mode to luminosity and then play with the sliders and adjust to your likings. Now let's add a bit of color in all of this. And for this part, I want to use gradient maps. One for my dancer and one for my background. First, click on the original image and press the W key on your keyboard for the quick selection tool. And then click on the Select Subject button, which is situated up there. Refine your selection because, of course, you only want to select your model. There are multiple ways of doing this. You can also use the pen tool if you want. Now that you have your selection, just add a gradient maps adjustment layer and voila! You can now add and change the colors that are only on your subject. I will of course put in the comment section below a few tutorials from other talented YouTubers and retouchers that will explain you how to do this, but they will do it better than me. I made a video on how I use color gradients in my color grading in the past, so I won't dive into this now. Make sure to check it out if you don't know how to use them. I said it earlier, let's use now another gradient map for the background. Since we only want to apply the effect on the background, all we have to do is copy the layer mask we just did. All we have to do is drag this layer, press and hold the Alt key on a PC or Option key on a Mac. And once you drag this mask to the new mask, all you have to do is invert it. Invert the layer by pressing Ctrl I or Command I. Like the old edit, I want to add a little bit of warmth with a specific color, but on the entire image. And for that, I will use another gradient map. On all the gradient maps I used, I changed the blending option from normal to soft light for a subtle change. And if the effect is still too strong, you can still change the opacity. Then I made slight changes with the hue and saturation of the blues, magenta, purple, yellows, and greens in the image with a simple hue and saturation adjustment layer. For the overall vibrancy and saturation of the image, a simple vibrance layer will do. Also, like my old edits, I made a simple and softer vignette with a curves adjustment layer. And finally, two things. I used the curves adjustment layer to slightly lift the exposure on the upper part of the image. And with the help of a levels adjustment layer, I corrected the overall exposure and added a little bit of greens and blues in the shadows. Don't forget the final touches, a bit of contrast in the hair with the curves adjustment layer, same thing for the eyes, and a little sharpening here and there. Again, I go through all these things in a previous Photoshop tutorial. All that will be linked in the description box below. And I almost forgot, I filled the gaps and holes of the image with Photoshop's content-aware fill. Now here is the before, and here is the after. And here is the old edit. And here is the old edit and the new one. For the second image, I did almost the exact same things. You can see that there was a little bit of compositing work here where I had a different image with more details in the sky. Plus, I tried to get rid of a few distractions here and there. For both new edits, I did a little bit of frequency separation to get rid of minor skin problems. And I did a bit of dodging and burning also on the clothes, on other parts of the image to make them pop a little bit more. With the old edit, I still don't understand what changes I wanted to make with the hue and saturation layers. I know I was targeting specific parts of the image, but I feel like it's overpowering some of the initial changes I tried to make in the first place. So I don't really know where I was going here. With these new edits, I favored using gradient maps adjustment layers. Again, I used the same steps in this second image. The layers used are almost all the same except for further corrections in the end on the sky. So here is the old edit, before and after. And now the new edit, before and after. Old edit and new. Really two different results. It seems like I was going all over the place and maybe overdoing things was my goal back then. All the other images were photographed in the same kind of environment and with pretty much the same lighting. So all I had to do is apply the same color grading to all the other images. So what can we learn here and how can you apply all this to your own work? Taking some time to reflect is necessary. I even made a video about this. Having an overall view of your work is important to clearly see from where you came from and to better see where you are heading or where you need to go. By doing this, you will be able to pinpoint all the bad decisions that you didn't realize you made. Bad habits you developed because you kept your nose to the grindstone. Lift your head up, take a step back, and correct your trajectory before it's too late. Looking back at your work might lead to rediscovering ideas that you left aside. Damn, I love working with wide-angle lenses, something that I've done less and less these past 2 months. So much to explore there still, and yeah, I should do more of these in the near future. One thing that took me a lot of time was finding my own style. Consistency further down the road is really important for people to quickly identify your work. And one thing is for sure, less is more. I'm not talking about the number of layers you're adding in Photoshop, but how far you're taking your images. Oversaturating your images or desaturating your images too much, pushing all the sliders all the way is something that we tend to do when we discover Lightroom, Capture One, or Photoshop. But soon you will realize with time that if you have done a decent job at capturing your image in the first place, you might not have to do much in post-production. Of course, this is different for everybody. This also depends on type of image you want to create, the style, and for who you are creating this image. One example of this is a past video I posted on this channel about my editing techniques, and you will see in this tutorial that the changes are really subtle. One of the biggest changes in my evolution as a photographer and retoucher is how fast I can identify the tools that I need to get the results that I want. I spend less time than I used to in Photoshop. So don't be ashamed of your past work, because this is a part of who you are as an artist today. So that's it. I really hope you enjoyed this video Photoshop walkthrough coronavirus edition. Tell me in the comments below if you wish to see more videos like this one on Photoshop and on how I edit my images. We are slowly entering the third week of quarantine here in the south of France. I really hope you guys are doing okay. Stay safe. I'll see you all in the next one. But until then, please stay strong.